Welcome to Remote Daily, everybody. Good to have you with us today. We have the founder and artistic director of Orchestra for the Earth and the music director of Oxford Opera today with us. Welcome to Remote Daily, John Warner. So good to have you in the room with us today.
Thanks, Felix. It's great to be here.
John, I have to ask you the most obvious question first. Why do you conduct?
That's a difficult question in some ways. I mean, I love music. I love musicians. And yeah, I get a lot of joy out of doing what I do, really. And I hope that it also brings other people joy. And one of the things I particularly love about conducting is it's a very, very collaborative form of music making. You know, I have a great respect for people who are soloists, but it always struck me from my own the way I am that it'd be quite a lonely, quite an isolating way of working. And I just love walking into a rehearsal room and having, 10, sometimes hundreds of people there to make music with.
Fantastic. It looks so alone and lonely up there on the podium, but it's not. You're embedded in what is a much bigger team. And oops, I think we just had an accidental screen share here. No, it's not accidental because it's you. Thank you, Liz. I just wanted to pull it up, and there it is, John Warner live on stage. Thank you, Liz, for sharing it. And we can look at your mastery just for a second here. So, can you take us into your mind right now? What is happening there?
That's an even more difficult question. I mean, the ideal is that you're not thinking at all about technique or anything like that, and that you're just purely kind of channeling the music. But in my experience, it's always a mixture of the two. But there are definitely moments where you're just completely lost in it and able to, just be part of the music. But like you say, you're kind of standing up there alone on a box, and you're always a little bit aware that it's quite a big responsibility as well as just, yeah.
And also feng shui wise, I mean, you have everybody in your back, hundreds of people you don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
How is that?
You can't see the audience. I've always found that a relaxing experience. The only people you can see are the people you're making music with, and I find that the more you kind of make contact with them, the easier it becomes. I used to get quite nervous when I used to play the piano in public, but with conducting, I've never got nervous at all.
Interesting. So you try to focus on the people before you, so you don't even think about the masses behind you that are judging your ill-fitting suit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not often anyway. Some concert halls you also get audiences all around you, so you can't help but see them. But,
that is actually how I got introduced to conducting. So my grandma would always take me to classical concerts in our hometown, and we had this one stage where they would sit all the young people onto the stage. So there were rows of seats in the back of the actual stage. So I would actually sit there as a shy teenager, also being kind of part of the concert, which was really weird. But it also meant that I was facing the conductor all the time. And it was very exciting and interesting to me to see how the conductors kind of talk through facial expressions, through gestures with the people they're working with. And I saw them sweat. I saw them jump. I saw them maybe sometimes furious, sometimes happy. It seemed to be a really challenging and demanding job. How would you describe your style of conducting?
Well, I'm still quite young, so I find that it's sort of a little bit different every time I do it. I have a great admiration for conductors in their 60s, 70s, 80s who just seem to have such a sense of security about how they do what they do, and I think that only comes with time. But Well, I guess there are different aspects to it. Technically, I don't know what my kind of technical style is. It's just what I want to do. And I was once told that learning to conduct is a little bit like when you're a teenager and suddenly your arms and legs are a little bit longer than you're used to, and it takes a while to readjust to how your body feels. And conducting is kind of a long process of that. To make something that looks natural to lots of other people, it takes quite a lot of work and quite a lot of practice. It doesn't just happen naturally. Most people's natural conducting is completely awful, speaking from personal experience. It takes a while to do something that really looks natural. And then there's a broader kind of, it's not just a performing musical role, it's also a kind of leadership role, and it's kind of about galvanizing people and connecting people and getting the best out of people. And I definitely try and focus on that.
That is also super fascinating because you're the leader in that, not only in that moment, and all the rehearsals coming up, and you're usually leading people that are much older than you. But before we talk about that, just for dummies, like what's, because you said natural conducting, like if I just do this is horrible. So what is the most important thing you actually do with the left hand and the right hand? What is it?
I'm not sure I could put it on one thing. It's got to be connected to breath. I think that's critical. You can bring a whole orchestra in by breathing out. That's how choirs work. If you ask a group of people to start singing Happy Birthday, at some point they'll all kind of breathe in at the same time and start singing. It happens. And conducting is a bit like that, and you really can bring in a whole orchestra just by going play, and thinking the word play, and it will happen with a good orchestra particularly, but even with an inexperienced orchestra, people can't help but understand how breath works. So I think as long as it's connected to breath, it usually you're doing the right thing.
So like Karis did before, you're trying to synchronize a group of people that are playing very complicated instruments to breathe at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because any instrumentalist would tell you that breathing is critical to playing in a good way as well. If you hold your breath, things don't work very well. Yeah.
How did your family and your friends react when you told them, "My name is John and I want to be a conductor"?
I was very lucky that I've always had a very supportive family who I never felt any pressure or judgment in regards to what I chose to do with my life. And in terms of my friends, well, I guess I've wanted to do it since I was a teenager. So most of my friends have never known me as anything else other than John who wants to be a conductor. So, but I mean, when I meet strangers and talk about it for the first time, a little bit like what's happening now, they usually say, "But what is that? What do you actually do? How does conducting work?" Because I've always seen a conductor, and often it doesn't seem to be in time with the music, or what do you really? So that's the reaction from most people. Yeah.
And what do you say then?
I usually draw the analogy of a theatre director. I think that's something that people connect with. If you gave a load of actors scripts for a play and told them to put it on, they could do a great job. It would probably take a long time, and they'd probably argue quite a lot because they'd all have lots of different ideas of how to do it. But they'd come to some conclusions eventually. Whereas if you have a director, you've got someone who's got strong ideas of their own and who's able to field the ideas of the rest of the cast and in a kind of focused way, as well as an efficient way, to make something happen. The only difference with the conductor is it's like you're a theatre director, but during the performance, controlling it to some extent as well. But it's always a back and forth. We don't make any noise as a conductor. So
yeah, and I think you can tell us a lot about sign language. We have, I think Jolie put it in the chat, it is akin to sign language what you do. And on Remote Daily, we have the virtual glitter that we give to our guests, which looks like something like this. Okay. And people in the community are very used to it. Is there any sign you can teach us right now? Anything from directing that you have found to be very meaningful when you're in front of people and you want them to do something particular?
A very practical one. It's not a very musical one, but a very practical one. When you're working with singers in an opera house, you're in the pit and the singers are on stage. And singers need a lot of support because it's very difficult to be an opera singer. You've often got 4 hours of music in German or Czech or French in your head, and you're also having to act. So a conductor is there to support you and look after you. And sometimes singers come in the wrong place, or you can tell they look at you and they're like, "I need a bit of help here." If you put up this signal, they know they shouldn't sing. If you put up this signal, they think, "Wait." And if you go like that, they sing. It's quite simple, but in my experience, there's a psychological understanding that this means stop, this means wait, and that means go. With a breath.
Internationally.
Bam.
no matter where you're from, because science can mean very different things, but this
Yeah, I
always
think so.
works.
Yeah. I mean, there's
Okay.
always a little bit of kind of getting to know each other between conductors and singers and orchestras where you sort of learn, as a conductor, you learn how the orchestra responds and the orchestra learns what you mean by certain things.
And I also saw conductors that use, like you in the video, use the sorry,
Stick,
I'm
yeah.
blanking, the conductor stick, and I
Yeah.
have seen some that don't. So why do you have the stick? Is it just the elongation of
Yeah, it is a little bit.
whatever you do? Or?
Yeah, it works a little bit like leverage. You know, if you move your hand like that, you don't see very much of it. Whereas if you've got a stick on the end of it, that it moves a lot more. And some people in orchestras, especially also in an opera house, they're a very long way away from you. So it's often purely a visual thing. But there are lots of technical things associated with it as well.
I see. Well, it's you mentioned already that you're usually surrounded by people that have more years, more experience on themselves, and you began conducting at age 18. You said you always wanted to do it since you were a teenager. Now you're 29, still decades younger than most conductors at this level. Do you ever feel intimidated when you, for the first time, walk in front of an orchestra and you're maybe bringing them a piece that they have played a gazillion times, and now here's John, the conductor, who wants to do it just a little bit different, but is also much younger than them?
Sure. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't find it intimidating sometimes. But orchestras are generally nice. I think that, you know, certainly if you're nice to them, they're nice, like most people. So I think, you know, as long as you're polite and friendly and relaxed and respectful, I've never had any bad experiences in response to those things. Usually you get bad responses of.
But you said that already. You have to be a leader, right? Not only on stage, you have to go through all the rehearsals and you have to put your style into a piece of music. So you have to go walk into the room and you have to exude something. I guess you can call it natural authority that they will accept. So how do you do that?
Well, I mean, there's kind of like I said, again, most orchestras, you know, they give you a fighting chance. You know, I mean, so as long as you go up there, you know, they're expecting to follow you. You know, they wouldn't really be there if they weren't expecting to follow you. And sure, if after the first 20 minutes they get the impression that you have no idea what you're doing, then they'll sort of start fending for themselves. But so, you know, you're given a leg up. I mean, sure, you know, people more than once, it's happened to me where people say, "Gosh, you're very young," you know, and to which the answer in my head at least is, "What do you want me to do about it?" You know, I could grow a beard and put on a couple of pounds, but I'm not sure it'd make much difference. So yeah, I mean, it's a problem, but it's a problem that I can't do anything about. So I just kind of got to get on with it.
Yeah, I like the "gosh, you're very young," because to me it sounds like, "Gosh, I'm very old."
Yeah, well, that's another answer that is in my head, but I usually don't say that one.
But what was a really terrible moment you had with an orchestra where you thought, no, I would rather have my box just disappear into the vacuum beneath the stage?
I don't think I've never had any dreadful experiences really. I mean, in hindsight, when I look back at, you know, how I might have acted when I was, you know, younger than I am now, then I sort of think I wouldn't have done that now. But that's more a matter of professional pride than any kind of dreadful experiences.
And did you ever have that feeling that you met a new orchestra and you get the feeling like, oh, they're not really following me, they're just playing this because the way they have played it before, and now I have to be really authoritarian about it?
Well,
the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't agree with the last bit as the conclusion to come to. I mean, if I was 65, perhaps I could take a more authoritarian approach. I'm still not sure I would. I would still always try and go for the gentle persuasion rather than anything else, because there may be a reason they're playing it that way. You know, I think it's important to respect the fact that these orchestras have traditions that go back hundreds of years sometimes, and traditions built by them and conductors far more experienced than me. So it's easy, I speaking from experience as a young conductor, to hear the way they play something and think, no, do it this way. But the conductors I respect the most and who I've watched rehearse, it takes them a while. They listen again, and then they try and marry it with how they see the piece, rather than coming in straight
Okay.
away and kind of changing things wholesale. You know, it's like if someone takes over a company and they might be like, right, we need to fire you and you need to do this differently and you're going to get paid less and you're going to get paid more. It doesn't go down very well. It can be very efficient in a way, but it's not a very human way of doing stuff. Yeah.
Gentle persuasion. One more question before we talk about Orchestra for the Earth. When we prepared for today, you told us conducting is like understanding manners and then how to break them, which is, I think, what you hinted at right now. So what do you do when you have like an entirely new piece of music in front of you and you're told to go to Orchestra XYZ? Let's say BBC Philharmonic, just for an example. So one of those where you're like, they're just breathing legends. What is the very first thing you do?
Well, it's sort of less and less that the piece is totally new to me, unless it's a brand new piece that's being written. So very often I have an idea of the piece, even though I've not conducted before. I've heard lots of people and I kind of know it from a distance or not such a distance. So there's often some kind of, something to tap into already. But if it's completely fresh, well, I get hold of a score and I kind of read through it and kind of figure out what I think about it, a few first impressions. And then I will find every recording I can possibly get hold of that piece and kind of just scour it. I think if you listen to one recording, you get one person's view of the piece stuck in your head, and that's too strong an influence. Whereas if you listen to loads of recordings, then you can have a whole kind of kaleidoscope of ideas of other people's views on it, and you can decide what you like and you don't like. And I also play through stuff at the piano, figure out how things sound, and if I've got colleagues who know the music, then speak to them about it. If I can go to the rehearsals of another conductor, that's the best thing imaginable. But that's a luxury.
Why is that the best thing?
Because you see the piece in its raw state. If you listen to a recording, it's been rehearsed, it's been perfected, and it's also been engineered in a way that doesn't always sound like it does in real life. So again, a classic example is in opera, where it's often the challenge is to get the orchestra to balance with the singers. Now in a recording, they can just turn the singers up and it's no problem. So you can have the sound of a whole orchestra playing really loudly and you can still hear the singer crystal clear. And then you go into a rehearsal and suddenly it doesn't work like that. So if you watch someone else rehearse, you hear the orchestra play it through for the first time, they make some mistakes, some things don't work. And then you watch over a series of hours and days, another conductor sort it out, and together they and the orchestra can make the piece come to life.
Fascinating. I will ask Liz to and thank you, John, for this amazing quote from Wagner. Wow, I wonder which Wagner it is. Don't look at the trombones, it only encourages them.
Yeah, it's a famous quote.
My brother played the trombone and I can 100% sign off that quote. What do you think, John? Is that true?
I've got many trombone colleagues. There's a great conductor called Bernard Haitink who died very recently at the age of 92, I think. And his 3 bits of advice for conductors were: don't talk too much, trust your musicians, and just occasionally tell the brass to play quieter. So,
as a trumpet player, I'm slightly insulted, but I won't hold it against you. And we're now looking into the Orchestra for the Earth. Thank you, Liz. It's sort of brutal to talk over this, but I will give it a try. So obviously we see you here in a different role, and we see you in a different style of classical musicians playing together, but it seems like you're still sort of conducting. Is that accurate?
Yeah, well, the story behind this is that with the orchestra, we also play chamber concerts, and particularly in the kind of height of the pandemic, it's all we could do, because fitting a full orchestra on stage wasn't really possible. And this was a tour we did in July 2021, when there was still a lot of restrictions on traveling around. This is in northern Italy. But yeah, I mean, I made this arrangement of a piece of Mahler, which is originally for about 120 musicians, and I reduced it for 7 of us so that we could still play it. And yeah, but in the rehearsals, I did not kind of, I guess I don't lead them in the same way that you do when you're a conductor. It comes back to my analogy with film stage directors, that sometimes it's useful just to have one person talking, but when there are only 7 of you, it can be more of a group conversation, and you can really take other people's views into account. So
I see. And it also fits perfectly into Jolie's question in the chat here. What is the difference between conducting and arranging?
Well, arranging in the way I just described is you take a score of a symphony written for a whole orchestra, and I have to, if I'm making it for 7 musicians, for example, I've got to find out what the kind of essential music is behind the score, because orchestration is, a whole kind of complexity of sound and color and using different instruments for different things. But at the heart of it, there's a piece of music that you can recreate with potentially not very many musicians. Whereas conducting is a kind of recreative act. The piece already exists, and you kind of bring it to life in the live moment.
I think I will have a look at the website for Orchestra for the Earth together with you, because it is such a unique project. It is such a unique organization that you started. So I just want for everyone to have a little intro to this. And maybe you can talk us through what it means to collaborate with artists, scientists, and charities on concerts to inspire environmental activism and education. What does that mean? How do you do that?
Well, I mean, music has a long and successful history as a catalyst for social change. I mean, just look back to a famous example like Live Aid. Well, now 5, 6 years ago, when I founded this orchestra, there was very little that was focusing on the climate crisis, and I saw that as a bit of a missed opportunity. Music inspires and unleashes in us the most kind of extraordinary, powerful emotions. Music can make you cry, it can make you laugh, it can make you dance, even unwillingly. And there are a few things that we have as humans that have the power to do that. And there's a reason that in history and also currently there are some regimes that don't trust it. Just look at Afghanistan, where it's essentially banned. It's partly, I suspect, because they realize the power that music has. Yeah, and so as far as the reason behind the orchestra was that the climate movement has a whole array of tools at its disposal: facts, images, and reason and science. And I thought, well, why not add music to that, which is the one tool we have, which really penetrates the deepest recesses of our hearts and minds.
Now, the sustainability aspect I find so interesting and so fascinating and so hard. I mean, I almost studied music, so the few people that I get to meet that have followed that path and that landed in orchestra, what I learned from them is that it's very hard work. It's usually underpaid, and it comes with a lot of travel and being away from family and friends. It is not an easy job. And now you're coming in and you list on your website, we just shared in the chat, which is orchestrafortheearth.co.uk, recommendations for best practices to make a positive environmental impact within the industry of classical music, of orchestras. So you recommend touring with a small group to smaller regional venues, teaming up with local artists for larger projects, travel over land versus flying, and so and so and so. It sounds amazing, but it also means, I think, less revenue for an orchestra in the end. So how has your call to action on environmental impact, how has that resonated with all the people in your industry so far?
Well, firstly, I'd say, since when did orchestras exist to bring in revenue? But I would also, it's a bit like farming. It doesn't really make a profit these days, and so it has to be to some extent privately and publicly subsidized. And so we just need to subsidize it to function in the best way possible. We also have to show audiences that we're serious about sustainability. Otherwise, we'll start to drive them away. You just need to look at some museums in the UK at the moment, which are still taking money from fossil fuel companies, and people are starting to boycott them. People are starting to picket them.
Wow.
And I think that would eventually happen to classical music if we didn't, sort our act out. The audiences, exactly the kind of audiences, the young audiences that we're trying to draw in to the concert halls, would be driven away from the fact that they associate us with stuff that they don't like. So I think there's actually a huge opportunity there in just kind of in showing that we care. A lot of institutions, a lot of ensembles are very interested in what we're doing. If I may say so, I think they know the future when they see it, and the future is sustainability. And well, it's kind of a two-pronged attack as far as I'm concerned. There is functioning in a sustainable manner, which, like I say, does rely on the funding to come from the right place and be directed at the right thing. You just need the public institutions to fund these organizations to be sustainable. They can't just spend their own money on it, because most of them are charities. And like you say, they can't really afford to. But also there's the opportunity of how we program and how we incorporate themes of nature and climate and social justice into our work. That is a huge opportunity for bringing in new audiences. So I see it generally as an opportunity as much as a responsibility.
How do you do it yourself? How do you personally balance practicing what you put out there in the world while also making a living?
It's difficult. I guess I have a general policy of trying to act in a way that would create a sustainable world if we all did it. That's kind of the aim. But only as far as I can within my means. I would love to build a house that was completely, low energy and renewable and everything like that. But I don't have the money to do that. That applies to a lot of things. It's usually the more expensive option to buy well-sourced food and that kind of thing. So I do as much as I can. When it comes to the obvious, the kind of big ticket things like flying, that also applies. I take the train if I can, especially if the work will pay for it, then it's a no-brainer. But often they won't, because it costs 5-6 times as much as taking a plane sometimes. But my hope is that if I start to build more of a career for myself, then I can do things that have a bigger impact. If really famous conductors were to set examples, they would get a wide audience that would take notice. And not many people would take notice of what I'm doing. But if you're Simon Rattle, for example, and you made a point of only ever traveling by train between Berlin and London, for example, which is where his two jobs are, then I think people would notice and people would start to follow. We're influencers in that respect as musicians. So it's, yeah.
And how do you, as far as I am concerned as a journalist, I have always learned from journalists that write about climate change and the climate crisis is that it's actually communication in the end. It's a communication crisis. You say even on your own website, climate crisis is actually a communication crisis. So how do you then actually communicate, like as the conductor of the orchestra with the tours that you do? Like how do you actually create a connection around this very, very emotional, as you said, tricky topic when you perform?
Well, like I said, it's such a powerful communication tool because it gets through to people's hearts and minds. And that's very important because I so often think, well, don't most people at least have some idea of how serious the situation is with climate and environment? So why don't they care? And that's because knowing and caring are different things. And that's why getting through to people's emotions is so important. Try watching a nature documentary without the music. It makes a big difference to how you experience it, your emotional connection with it. It's also about a kind of collective thing that you get with music, which is critical for building a movement. The usual channels through which we learn about climate issues, documentaries, newspaper articles, podcasts, we tend to experience alone in our homes or wherever we're listening to it. And the result of that, I mean, these things are great for sure, but it can feel very overwhelming. It can feel very isolating, and sometimes paralyzing when you're just bombarded with information about how serious the situation is. And that's only been compounded by a pandemic as well, and all the restrictions put on us. The concerts, on the other hand, are the opposite of that. They're shared spaces, they're a chance to connect with other people, to socialize, to share ideas, and to feel part of a community. There's something extraordinary about being in a building of 2,000-3,000 people listening to the same piece of music. And sometimes, you know, particularly at really intense moments or just at the end, you can kind of feel everyone moving forwards in their seat and you're bonding over something. And we need occasions like that now more than ever, not just for our own happiness, but to allow us to see that we're not alone in worrying about climate change and our efforts to protect it.
Does that also mean, though, that you would occasionally just turn around and face the audience and say, I want to share something?
Of course. So in practice, that's it. I usually talk at the concerts, or someone does. Often we get high profile speakers, not musicians, to come and talk about stuff. So they're really spaces to talk about it, and with the music as the element that gives people a kind of binding, emotionally memorable experience. In the grand scheme of things, we're a small organization fighting a big problem, but I feel no ownership over it as a kind of method. I would love it if lots of other orchestras started doing the same thing. And also, I would just one more thing on that point. The chance to engage with audiences in a neutral format, like a concert, is so important, because we tend to fight over politics the whole time, particularly intergenerationally. There's a lot of resentment from young people towards old people about climate change. And if you can get them to agree on something that, music is great, music moves us, music connects to something that we share as humans, then I think that's a route to consensus. They always say that politics is downstream of culture. So, yeah.
You lead your industry in a new future of work and of togetherness and of change, and it's so impressive. And you do that on so many levels. And I want to share one last piece here with everyone, because you already mentioned it, that during the pandemic you directed many virtual projects, and there was one where you edited the video of more than 700 pre-recordings together to form a digital orchestra. And I want to ask Liz to show us that, because it's just another work of genius. Just wow. And what does it make you feel watching this right now, John?
Well, it takes me back to a bizarre and extreme time in our lives, when because all of these people I used to work, still do, and at the time used to work with on a regular basis, and knew very well as friends as well as colleagues. And there was something quite moving about. I recorded the piano track for this as like a master track, sent it off to all of them, and then I got back these recordings with the little videos of these people I hadn't seen for a while. It was quite moving, and yeah, it was a. I mean, it was a an incredibly time-consuming experience. I'm not going to lie about that. I have a lot of respect for sound engineers and the skill and effort and stamina that they have. It takes a lot of time and patience to do that. I should explain from that video, you only get one little square for each musician, but each of them recorded several tracks. So the flautist recorded all 5 flute parts, that kind of thing. So there are sort of each of them appears in the sound multiple times, even though usually only once visually.
Wow.
I
And
learned a lot about it.
You really edited the video?
Yeah, and the audio. I mean, the video is easy compared to the audio. The audio is just a monster job.
What software did you use for that?
Final Cut for the video and Logic for the audio.
Fantastic.
Little plug there.
Well, congratulations. I mean, as John put just in the chat, you should move that over to TikTok now and see what you still can get out of it. What did you learn for your now back to in-person conducting from this experience?
Well, in recording sessions, I learned that recording engineers are to be treated with great respect. That's for sure. I learned a lot about the music. I mean, in a way, it was a chance to work on it in such forensic detail that conductors can never dream of. But so I really learned, a lot about that. I mean, I'd conducted the piece before, but it was extraordinary seeing it from the inside out. I also had to think a lot about the psychology of the musicians when I made the piano track, in that I didn't have any rehearsals, so I had no chance to answer back, so to speak. I sent them my track and they sent back their recordings, and that was that. So I had to second guess a lot of other things that otherwise, I also learned that there is more of a future than I would have thought in the digital sphere for classical music. I believe very deeply that some things are best done live, and classical music is one of those things. But I think the breadth of audience we were able to reach in doing that was something we would have never achieved before the pandemic. And so I think the hybrid of live performance with a digital component is something that is very important and that we should take forwards.
Wow, that's fascinating. Also for us here at Remote Daily, we are a very diverse team from very different professions, and we all, started trying to figure out the space. And I don't think we will ever create something in the virtual that is really like better than being, with your body somewhere out there in the physical world. But what you just said, the breadth of the audience, the accessibility that comes in virtual is something that we experience firsthand. We see it here, people from all different time zones, different continents, different places who are just, on the run, on vacation, at home, are here. They could never be a part of this otherwise and make their voices heard. And that, to me, is this amazing thing that happened in this horrible time, that finally accessibility became went to a whole new league. Is that also, do you think classical music is grasping that moment and is becoming more accessible? Because I always felt, even back when I was a teenager going to the concert with my grandma, that it is a very elitist experience in many places, and that people pride themselves for, knowing it all and all that, and then talking about it in a break. So do you think it is becoming more accessible?
Yes, it's definitely going in the right direction, and it absolutely has to. I would say from my point of view, I think focusing on things like climate issues is critical for bringing the average age of the audience down and building a new audience, because no one wants an aging audience. And that's not to say that I don't love the fact that people, on the older half of the generations come to our concerts. That's great, but we need the people who are going to be those old people in 50 years' time to come. And if you put something that the young people care about most, the environment, as part of what you do, then you're going to draw them in.
And you also were talking about the hybrid experience of concerts. So that is also going to persist, you think? That there will be a lot more live streaming and virtual access?
Yeah, I think there's a little fear that if you live stream it, then people will not bother to come. They'll just watch the live stream. I'm not sure that's true. I think people know that the value of being in the room is a high one. But if they can't, then why not? I mean, for a very long time, the Berlin Philharmonic has been doing this. I mean, since the decades, they've been doing videos. Yeah. And I spend my whole time watching those things, and I don't get to hear the orchestra live very often.
I just met a person who works here at the orchestra at the Met, and she said her mom in Germany always goes to the movie theater to see her play. So because they're also streaming what a fantastic way of connecting. And what dreams do you have, John? I know we have one dancer on the team, Liz, who was already wondering whether you ever worked with dancers as a conductor. Do you have any sort of dreams where you want to take your conducting in the future?
Well, on the dancing front, ballet conducting is an incredibly specific skill, and one which I have never made an effort to do really. It's usually you become a ballet conductor, and that's what you do. In a way, because if you get the speed wrong in normal conducting, nothing really bad happens. If you get the speed wrong in ballet conducting, someone might fall over. And that's a major responsibility, which requires a complete sublimation of the ego, I think, which is a bit of an oxymoron for a conductor. But yeah, it's I've just once worked with dancers. There's a piece by Stravinsky which involves a couple of dancers, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah, I love all of what I do, really. I love working in opera, I love working in concert halls, and I love working with small ensembles as well as big ones.
And where can we see or hear you next, online or in person?
I've got a couple of things I'm working in. Well, I'm doing some recordings in Italy over the next couple of months, and a couple of chamber concerts here in the UK. And then I'm working at Glyndebourne, the Summer Opera Festival in the UK for most of the summer.
Oh, wow. Glyndebourne Orchestra Festival. We'll share that in the chat. And now for our final moments here, before we offer you a final song from our own artists in the room, I just want to, for everybody who wants to switch their camera on, I just want to repeat the gestures that we learned from John today once and for all. So this means stop immediately. Kyoko is here and Rick as well. This means pay attention, right?
Yeah.
And this is go.
Yeah.
Poke.
Exactly.
Do it. So whenever you see a conductor go like this, were they too late?
No, usually it's precautionary. If you're in an opera house, and the idea is that if the singer needs to look round to check for the cue, you're giving it already.
Okay,
I was in the right place. Usually that's a general rule of conducting, is that if you're taking someone by surprise, then something's gone wrong. It's usually a mutual.
I can tell you, the one thing that we have here on Remote Daily and that we love is giving some virtual love to our guests. So this is from all of us to you. I hope you can feel it, John. The love that is raining down on you from the Remote Daily audience all around the world. Thank you all for being here. And thank you so much, John. This was absolutely fantastic. I learned so much in this hour. What is your final message? We always give the mic back one last time. Is there anything else you want to say? A personal mantra, an announcement, say hi to your parents who let you be a conductor, anything you would like to say before we say goodbye?
That's a difficult question. I hadn't thought about that one. Thanks for having me. I mean, it always brings joy to me when people are interested in music and love music and listen to music. So keep doing that.
Next week on Remote Daily, we will continue our conversation about sustainability. Today, I want to thank everybody who was part of the show today. Have a good weekend.